What is the most shocking thing you have ever witnessed, not safe for work? I have too. Witnessed a pretty gruesome motorcycle accident a few years ago. I trained to work in the death industry and saw the aftermath of these accidents before, but seeing one firsthand was brutal. The friend that was with me went to counseling to cope with what we saw, and sometimes I still picture that man's body looking so broken and contorted. They're nicknamed donor cycles for a reason. The next was when I was 13 and woke up to my mother's boyfriend at the time masturbating next to my bed and watching me sleep. Never told anyone what happened, and he just got worse from there. Found out he died a terrible death years after destroying his liver with alcohol. Couldn't have happened to a better man. A bar fight when I was 19. The guy didn't want to fight, but the other guy was pushing him and then sucker punched him. When the guy went down, it was clear he wasn't okay. He couldn't get up, was trying, but kept falling back down. That alone was sad enough, but the guy who punched him booted him so hard in the head, he went backwards, and his head hit the curb. I actually started crying, and luckily people started stepping in, and the asshole walked away. It was horrible to watch. I was studying nursing, and my friend had that patient, a very nice and proper older gentleman. One morning I hear her screaming from the room next door. The man is standing on his bed, naked, and he took his catheter off. Blood was flying everywhere. The poor man had a bad reaction to an anesthetic, so we gave him something to calm him down, then we cleaned him up and put the catheter back. The next day he didn't remember anything, so we kept the incident to ourselves. I'm sure he would have been horrified to find out what he did. A man sitting in an empty post office parking lot at between 2 and 3 a.m. I was walking home from a friend's house as a teenager and seen a car there with the door open, and as I approached to see if everything was okay, there was a huge flash of light. With a bang, the man had a shotgun under his chin and had pulled the trigger as I was then maybe 15 feet or so of him. He was gone instantly, and I was in shock and ran home, jumped in my bed, and woke the next morning and realized I had bits and stains from him and the debris all over my clothes. That moment has been on repeat in my mind regularly for the past 20 years. In the parking lot of a state park, evening, lake water like glass, sky mild, summer breathing all around me. What a beautiful day it had been. I loaded my 3-year-old into the car and was packing the trunk when I heard screaming. 40 yards away, there's a cluster of children scattering. A small boy, no older than my kid, has his hands clasped, pleading, and standing over him is a woman, I presume his mother, screaming how stupid he is and how badly he was going to be punished. She close-fisted hit the side of his head 3 times, and this little squirt bounced his head on the pavement, screaming the kind of scream that hurts your throat for days. I lunged to go make it stop and confront the woman. My then husband grabbed me by the waist and said, "Don't." Park ranger truck pulled up. I don't know what happened to either of them, but I was distraught for 2 weeks, and I still see him with my pleading hands after 17 years. I was on the expressway. All of a sudden, a speeding sports car comes up and had to brake behind a slower vehicle. They started to move to the right to get around the other car, but an SUV was right next to them in that lane. The SUV freaks out, thinking the sports car was going to hit them. It swerves to the right, then tries to adjust itself to the left. Back and forth it went for a few swerves until it finally gave way and started tumbling over and over. It tumbled several times until it finally stopped upside down. All of the other traffic around the incident was slowly braking to avoid causing more damage. I was one of the car's front row to the whole thing. I was lucky to not be rear-ended myself while I attempted to not crash into the victims. Looking through all of my mirrors to see what the other traffic was doing, I slowly passed by the upside-down SUV. As I passed by them, I saw a hand reaching out the broken window, grasping for help. Not exactly shocking, but when I was about 5 years old, I was at my father's house for the weekend. Parents split. I couldn't sleep because I felt very weird. I went downstairs and found my dad in his chair with the TV on. I thought he was sleeping and couldn't wake him up. It turns out he had a brain aneurysm and died right there. I didn't know anything was wrong until the morning when my mom came to pick me up. I woke up at around 4 a.m. a few days ago. I still live with my parents. This is important. I walked downstairs to get something to drink, only to see a silhouette in the darkness. The lights suddenly came on, and the silhouette was gone. I was confused as the lights should not have been able to turn on without anyone touching the switch. A man called out to me from my couch. I looked at him, confused but also slightly at ease for some reason. He was a tall, thin black man in loose khakis and a loose white button-down shirt. He told me his name was Jeremy and that he was sorry for intruding. I asked him how he got inside, and he said, "I don't remember. I just woke up here. Do you know where Adeline is?" I started to speak when my mom walked downstairs and asked who I was talking to. I started to say Jeremy before I stopped and looked around, realizing that no one was there. My mom gave me a weird look and told me to go to bed. I have no idea who Jeremy was or how he got in my house. I'm also wondering if the silhouette was him or if he saved me from something. On my 5th birthday, I was standing on a street corner with my mother. An elderly lady stepped into the street and was flattened by a garbage truck a few feet in front of us. Front, then back wheels. I had what I imagined was pieces of brain on my pants. The lady was pancaked in the road. My mother entered into a mental health facility later that year because she couldn't handle the memory of it. I wasn't too traumatized by the event, but my mother, being in that facility for a month, effed with me for years. Walked into a family home, part of an ambulance call many years ago. One of my first runs ever. Husband with his kids preparing supper, wife sitting on the edge of the bed complaining of chest pain. Mid-conversation trying to assess her, she just checks out and slumps over. Embolism killed her. Mood was like walking through a door, went from simple transport and comfort to CPR for what felt like forever. Faces have faded, but I'll never forget it. Another EMT that stayed to help was the one that gave us the full details after they figured out what happened. When I was young, me and my mate were bored, so we were rummaging through the closet when I found an old video camera. We thought it would be fun to play with it, so we start checking the tapes to see if we could find an empty one. First tape was of my sister's dance recital, and I didn't want to use that one, so I pop in another tape. Takes me a second to realize what's happening on the next tape, but I soon realize it's a sex tape of my parents. My mate takes a look, but he keeps watching, so I'm like, "Dude!" And he replies with, "What? They're not my parents." A guy that was planning on hanging himself under one of the main bridges of my town. I was like 15 at the time, and the only reason we found him was because of the bike park that was near the bridge, and we heard him crying. Me and a few mates ended up talking to him for nearly 4 hours. This was a time before mobile phones until the cops arrived. I guess someone saw us and went home and called him. He ended up coming down peacefully and ended up becoming the foreman of one of the major factories in my town. It was quite a shock at that age, seeing someone on the verge of suicide. One was a legit WTF, the other I knew was coming. Sitting in my truck, waiting to go into my work's corporate office for a meeting. I was parked on the street in downtown OKC, Bricktown if you know the area. I was looking over paperwork when I looked over and see a man and a woman who looked methed out of their minds, arguing about something. The guy walks off and the woman just leans against a random car, pulls her pants down, and takes a piss. I was completely stunned, like what the actual fuck? The other was several years ago. My great-grandmother was on her deathbed. I volunteered to stay up to give her meds every 2 hours since I had to study for a biology exam anyway. She was at the point where she had been unresponsive for a few days, only took a breath about once a minute, like you could almost time it exactly. So I'm sitting there half watching Happy Gilmore and going over my flashcards. I'm not sure what made it click, but I realized I hadn't heard her breath. I got up and sat beside her and watched her go. Maybe 15 years ago, my sister was driving me to work. We were getting anxious cause there was so much traffic and I was late. When it started to clear up, we came to a light pole and a fire engine was removing a motorcycle from it. Only it wasn't a motorcycle, it was a car. It must have smashed into that pole so hard at such a high speed that it was almost completely flat in every way. Thinking about what could have happened to who was in that car and the way it ended up had me shaking. When Twitter first started to take off, I was just browsing through users and posts and came upon a profile that was all child porn. I immediately threw up from the images I saw. I notified the Center for Missing and Abused Children. Then I notified Twitter about the user, and then I had notified the center so they wouldn't just delete the user, but maybe hide it till the government does what it does here in the USA. I still have nightmares about those images, more so now that I'm a mother.